one of the things that I often get asked by people is, when we talk with the public, is what's different today of the wheat that we plant and harvest, and what's different from the wheat that we used to harvest 20, 30, or 50 years ago?
Actually, wheat has received an unfair accusations of being unhealthy, and then the modern wheat is actually, they went so advanced and they use the word is like toxic to people. And then there were lots of publicity, and then bloggers, they were blaming wheat being responsible for depression, or being obese. I mean, any health problems, the people were associating it, because they were associating any problems with wheat consumption, which did not have any scientific basis. All these claims did not have any scientific basis. We actually grew 30 historical hard red spring wheat varieties. What that means is the first variety, the oldest variety we used in our study was from 1910. And then we had some varieties from 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. So we can actually see if there was any trend, or if there is any change that happens over the time. Can we see those changes? And then we use about 30 spring wheat varieties. One challenge is if I use a sample that is grown on 1910 or 1920, I cannot compare the chemical composition or gluten content that the variety that is grown this year or last year. Why? Because environment has impact on those conditions. So we grow all these samples in one location under the same conditions, because my focus is not to see the impact of environment. I just want to compare the grain composition independent of environment if they were treated all the same. So those samples were grown in 2012 and 2013, and then we analyze in terms of protein content, and then starch chemistry, and details on the protein chemistry, glutenins, gliadins. And then one of the major claims that I was hearing, that older varieties did not have the proteins that cause celiac disease. That was one of the major claims. So what we did is we extracted those parts of the gluten-forming proteins that are responsible for celiac disease, and we used the proteomics approach. And then we wanted to see if those peptides, but let's call them protein pieces for layman terminology, or small pieces of proteins that cause the celiac disease, we searched them in all these wheat varieties. And actually we found that the celiac causing proteins, they were found in the old varieties, and also they were found in the newer varieties. And there was no correlation, there was no linkage between the old varieties or the release year. So breeders did not make today's wheat more toxic, or they did not make today's wheat more celiac disease causing wheat. Mm-hmm. So they were always there. And then we have the scientific data to show that, again, those peptides, those proteins, they were always in the wheat. And another aspect was we compared protein content again. So actually wheat breeders, they have big pressure on increasing the protein content. I am specifically talking for bread wheat, and then also increasing the yield. And they don't go together. There is like inverse relationship. But actually breeders, they were able to increase the yield, and then also they were able to increase the protein contents. So we see some increase in the protein content. And then there were some changes in the ash content. The newer varieties, they had lower ash. So some traits were impacted, but in a good way. But in general, we did not see significant difference in terms of grain composition, in terms of celiac disease causing proteins, presence of those proteins in the modern wheat versus the old wheat varieties. Uncomfortable. So bread processing conditions and then the ingredients found in the bread, they can impact people's response consuming bread. We have lots of chemicals in bread formulations, and then we are doing some research on to reduce those chemicals in the bread formulations. And I understand the baking industry because customers demand soft bread for 10 days. So it's next to impossible if you don't have some chemicals in the formulation.